You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
Pivot Point, a show bringing you diverse views on the news. I'm your host, Maya Rockeymoore. Well, it was an exciting week. 3 budgets were released on Capitol Hill, and they couldn't have been more divergent. The House Republicans released their version of the newest version of the Ryan budget. Again, it's a slash and burn kind of budget prescription. And in the middle, we had the Senate Democrats introducing their version, which was a one-to-one kind of deal, more balanced and measured than most. And certainly, we also had the Congressional Progressive Caucus. They released their budget, and we're going to talk more about their budget in a few moments. But we also had the movement to repeal the sequestration. So we'll be talking to Daniel Marins, the political director at Social Security Works, and also the producer of Takes Action News with David Schuster. And this week we had CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference. I call it America's anachronism. We had people who were talking about restoring racism. We had people who were lamenting the fact that Obama has been against women. We had the return of Sarah Palin. I mean, it was basically a blast to the past this week in Washington with the CPAC conference. And we'll hear more about what happened there from Robert Brune, who was a reporter who covered the CPAC conference. But first, we will be talking to my great friend, producer here at Pivot Point. Peter, welcome.
How you doing, Maya?
I'm doing great.
Glad to hear it.
3 budgets released on Capitol Hill this past week. Tell us about Ryan.
So Paul Ryan's budget is like the most Paul Ryan-y of all the Paul Ryan budgets so far, if you could say that. Surprised, that isn't something we heard on the Daily Show. But so first off, the tax rate stuff is really, really tremendous. So it reduces the top tax rate and the corporate tax rate down to 25%. And which would lose the government about $7 trillion.
So he's giving more money away to the wealthiest 1% of America, who, by the way, already have more money combined than the rest of the 99% of Americans.
Right. And not only giving them like a tax break, but a huge, huge tax break. He also cuts capital gains taxes as well, down to, I think, 20%.
So not surprising, but then he continues his assault on working class Americans by doing what?
Yes. So then Medicare, he turns Medicare into a voucher program.
Same plan from last year.
Right. Exact same thing. Privatization, voucherization, whatever you want to call it. And he also institutes a per capita cost cap at GDP plus 0.5%, which he has no explanation, which is the big thing about this budget that you have to really point out. On everything, there's not a whole lot of detail. So he's like, cost cap sounds like a great idea, not how you're going to penalize people or how you're going to implement anything.
Which means that we shouldn't take this seriously because, not a lot of detail means that you can't even score it, which means that it's not a serious budget. And yet we continue to see the Ryan budget get serious consideration in the newspapers across the country, in the television news commentating, as if Paul Ryan were a serious policymaker who was presenting a serious budget. Right. His budget is so not serious that they can't even score the budget, which means that we should dismiss it out of hand. But I want to say this. A budget is about your statement and your vision for America's future. And if this represents Paul Ryan and the House Republicans' vision for America's future, then it's a future where people can't afford to eat. It's a future where there is no investment in education and infrastructure. It's a future where we can be guaranteed fear as we drive across bridges in this country because we will not be able to afford to basically make sure that those bridges are safe. It is a budget that exacerbates the wealth inequality that we are experiencing in this country, because he is giving away even more of America's revenue to the top 1% of Americans who already have more wealth than the other 99% combined. So his vision of the future is a vision of an oligarchy. An oligarchy, plain and simple, in which America's wealthiest individuals are the ones, and corporations are the ones controlling the world, and no one else can afford to live in it. He won't even be able to afford to live in his vision of the future. So, I mean, it is basically something that we can dismiss out hand, right?
Yes, definitely. And overall, like, it basically turns every program that a Democrat has ever liked, food stamps, Medicaid, and parts of it, repeals the entire Affordable Care Act. Like, it turns everything to block grant programs that don't keep up with inflation. And like the Tax Policy Center even says, like, this isn't a serious thing because you say you want to, decrease the deficit. And when they scored what little was there and, extra populated over 10 years, we're still $1.2 trillion in debt in a best case scenario in 2023 if this budget goes through.
Not only that, but it ignores politics. I mean,
Right.
we just had an election where his budget was soundly rejected, and yet he comes back to repeal Obamacare, to actually eliminate food stamps and Medicaid by block granting them and allowing states to basically cut them at will. So basically, Paul Ryan's vision of America's future is an nihilistic vision of the future, meaning that he does not see this country as a going concern for the foreseeable future. And I think that we should dismiss it out of hand. What about the Senate Democrats' budget?
So, from what I gather, it's kind of like, it's just the middle of the road. It's very, very tepid. It's kind of like the White House idea of what we should go with. It's the Senate Democrats, I think, basically saying, hey, guys, like, everyone slow your roll. Let's do this compromise thing. Which, like, it's really, really hard to, like, take that seriously in some ways as well when they're talking about negotiating and coming to the table with people that'll only come to the table if they have, a gun to your head and all the ammunition.
Right. So it's a $1.85 trillion package split evenly between taxes and spending cuts. It includes, $240 billion in cuts to the Defense Department over a 10-year period. They seek to save interest payments to the tune of $242 billion. But it also includes $493 billion in domestic cuts, including $275 billion in cuts to health care. It has a small stimulus project that is $100 billion in stimulus spending, so they do have a nod to the need for additional stimulus given our weakening economy. But it is absolutely middle of the road. It is milquetoast. What kind of vision for the future do you think that this presents?
I see this as, it's not full on like Paul Ryan English style austerity, but it's still kind of Paul Ryan light. It's like you have to give them and so much to like come to the table. And so this is the Senate bill. And let's say like this is actually the plan we end up with. For this to then get through the House, even if some magic thing happens, like Freaky Friday type stuff, and the Republicans actually negotiate, we're gonna have to give away the store.
Right. So that is why I am pleased to introduce, and pleased that they did introduce, Congressman Keith Ellison and Congressman Raul Grijalva, who are the co-chairs of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. They introduced their budget this week, and their budget does what?
It's called the Congressional Progressive Caucus Back to Work budget, and it literally will put America back to work, which then will help, decrease the deficit over time by bringing in the tax revenues that we're used to when our unemployment rate isn't at, 12%.
So we're talking, millions of new jobs,
Millions of dollars. So,
$2.1 trillion in stimulus.
Yep.
Go ahead.
They're doing $1.1 trillion in infrastructure projects alone. They will dramatically increase aid to states to pick up for all these budgets that are underwater on the state level. They will repair or build new 35,000 public schools. They'll extend unemployment insurance, the emergency unemployment insurance. They'll reinstate that so people have 99 weeks if they lost their job to get back to work. It's also one of the cool things. They do a lot of old school, literally like New Deal Roosevelt type programs. They have a public works jobs program. They would reinstate the Civilian Conservation Corps to take care of the environment while putting people back to work. They'd also have a youth employment program. So you have all these kids that, know they're not going to have a job or think they're not going to have a job, even if they're 18 or so, or they're in college or they're just out of college. and younger, and then put them to work as well.
What I like best about it is how they actually raise the money to pay for all of this. In recognition of the fact that we have growing and huge income inequality in this country, wealth inequality, the CPC's Back to Work budget actually seeks to level these policy-driven disparities by actually fixing the policies that help to create them in the first place.
Right.
And he does that by what?
It's really cool. So first, they reinstate the Making Work Pay tax credit for 2 years as an instant, right-away stimulus for working families. They also put in a bunch of economic development and improvement kind of tax incentives. And really, their goal is to cut poverty in half by 10 years, a lot of which they do by keeping the tax rates exactly the same for 98% of Americans, first off. And they say that's fine, that's a decent part of the system. The richest 2% then return to Clinton levels. But they also will put in a bunch more deductions that have been taken out recently, like child care deductions and stuff like that to help working families. But the best part is we start taxing millionaires and billionaires at special rates depending on how much they make. So 1 to 10 million, it's 45%. 10 to 20 million, it's 46%. 20 to 100 million, it's 47%. 100 million to 1 billion, 48. 1 billion plus 49. It will also close tons and tons and tons of corporate deductions. Like you can no longer deduct, $4,000 for two people business dinners that, the guys at Enron were going to. And it also puts in a financial transaction tax, which is cool.
Now this is big. Financial transaction tax, which raises a huge sum of money.
Amazing
It also treats unearned income, taxes unearned income, the same as wages,
right?
Which is huge. It raises a significant amount of money. So all of these various proposals for revenue raisers are exactly the kinds of strategies that mainstream policymakers, including those in the White House and in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, have been afraid to touch over the past several years. Yet it's just what our economy needs to raise the revenue to put us on the right track to prosperity. Because the fact of the matter is just as the Ryan budget will do nothing for us in terms of restoring America's prosperity. In fact, will take us backwards. We'll likely lose more jobs, and the future is one of nihilism, meaning that it's a dark place where no one can afford to live except the top 1%. And just as the Senate Democrat budget is, the same kind of milquetoast kind of policy prescriptions that we've been seeing over the last 6 years or so, we see the alternative of the Congressional Progressive Caucus budget being a true investment in America's future, one that actually sees a vision of American society prosperous, one that seeks to level inequalities in our nation, one that seeks to bring up certainly and invest in those core sectors of our society that can drive new job creation and put Main Street America back to work. And this is critically what we need right now. It's critically what we need. So I was very pleased to see that. What are its prospects for being passed in the House?
So I don't really see a whole lot of prospects for being passed in the House, because it also has some stuff we didn't mention that, like, a lot of that stuff to most mainstream Americans aren't going to sound that ridiculous. And they also have a special tax in there for mega banks and stuff like that. But like a carbon tax, I don't see going through Congress anytime soon. All the amount of Pentagon cuts, they'd end all the wars and everything like that immediately. I see also, it's really common sense, and people on the right will even say it too, but eliminating coal, oil, and natural gas subsidies, I think, is very, very common sense stuff that when you think of it from a real political, pragmatic perspective, it ends up being impossible with the way special interests are, which it also, the CPC budget happens to also fix by federally funding all elections.
Well, actually, this brings up another point, and to the extent that we see both ends of the extreme, and the politics of pragmatism is supposed to bring the extreme somewhere into the middle. Does the Congressional Progressive Caucus budget get any level of serious consideration in terms of the compromise package?
Not really.
That's too bad.
Outside of the mainstream media, or in the mainstream media, I've seen a couple good articles. Ezra Klein pointed out that, why doesn't every Democrat stand behind this and use it as a negotiating position?
Right.
When
That's exactly right.
Yeah,
it could be used as a strategy.
Right.
A strategy we haven't seen much from the Democratic Party leadership lately, and I'm not afraid to say it.
And that since day one, I don't think we've ever seen from President Barack Obama.
Yeah, this is true.
Like,
and
if
I
you
include
start in
him
the middle,
leadership.
you end up to the right.
This is exactly right. You are listening to Pivot Point with Maya Rockeymoore, sponsored by the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. We'll be right back after the break to talk with Daniel Marins, Policy Director at Social Security Works and Executive Producer of Take Action News with David Schuster.
This is John Bauman. You know me best as Bowser, formerly of the group Sha Na Na. And you know, when we were rocking and rolling all those years ago, I wasn't particularly worrying about my retirement or how I'd pay for health care. But now that I'm 65, I really understand the importance of Medicare. Not just for myself, but for generations of working Americans who need secure health care as they get older. That's why this election is so important. The Romney-Ryan Coupon Care Plan will mean the end of traditional Medicare. It gives seniors a partial payment which loses value over time and raises our health care costs as much as $500 more each month. Coupon Care also puts us at the mercy of private insurers, making it harder to pick our own doctors. All of this to pay for tax cuts for the wealthy? Are you kidding me? Americans of all ages say no to Coupon Care. Bum 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 dang a dang dang ding a dong ding. Preserve Medicare.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
Welcome back to Pivot Point. I'm your host, Maya Rockeymoore, and I'm pleased to welcome Daniel Marins. He is the Policy Director at Social Security Works and the Executive Producer of Take Action News with David Schuster. Welcome, Daniel.
Maya, it's great to be here.
Well, listen, Daniel, we are well into the sequester right now, but this week we had something called the Sequester Showdown. What was it?
Well, what it was that we took the signatures of 300,000 rank-and-file activists, regular, ordinary Americans, who signed a petition saying, no cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, cancel the sequester now. And we had a press conference with a number of progressive members of Congress, including Congressman Alan Grayson, Congressman John Conyers, Congressman Keith Ellison, and Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. And they declared their support and reiterated their support for this movement, to end the sequester now without replacing it with Social Security cuts or Medicare cuts. And then later in the day, we walked with Congressman Alan Grayson to Speaker John Boehner's office in the House office buildings of Rayburn and delivered those petitions, and we got it all on tape. And so there was that showdown, where the dramatic moment where Alan Grayson was delivering those signatures to John Boehner. Of course, he wasn't there.
Oh, he wasn't there. That's too bad. And how did his staff meet you at the door?
Well, okay, so it was pretty funny. The first, people were staring at us, obviously, because it was a huge, I guess about a dozen people, and there was a camera crew. And they opened the door for us, and I think I saw Barry Jackson, one of Speaker Boehner's advisors, open the door there, and they were, sort of asking questions like, who are you guys? What are you doing here? And then I think they were okay about taking the signatures, but one of us heard in the background, they were like, now I know why they hate that guy so much, about Alan Grayson.
Oh, I got it.
So,
well, interesting. Let's listen to Sheila Jackson Lee and what she had to say at the showdown.
And for those whose memories fade, I want you to be reminded of the tsunami, for it does not give notice. And it is tragic and reckless for those to say, you know what? The sequester has started and I feel pretty good. because you have not been hit by the tsunami. And it may come at a moment, Mr. Grayson, when we are away on work recess, or when the speaker has sent us home and we're not here working. And all of a sudden, a great percentage of America will be walking around without benefits, without child care, without teachers in our schools, and will ask the question, what happened? It was
Okay, so Sheila Jackson Lee is basically commenting on something that we're hearing a lot in the news media, which is the sequester is really not affecting Americans. Daniel, your take?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely irresponsible of anybody in the media and any member of Congress, for that matter, to claim that this will not affect Americans' lives. Just because the federal government has managed to this point to sort of move things around, juggle things to make sure the worst effects don't hit yet, it doesn't mean that they won't hit eventually. I mean, we're talking about air traffic controllers, the ability to monitor and bring in airplanes. That will affect Americans' lives. But more importantly, the money that it will sap out of the economy from all the, and actually all the furloughs and layoffs will result in at least 700,000 jobs cut from the economy. Mm-hmm. So it's completely outrageous. Though what is kind of, I guess, ironic about the whole thing is that the whole point of it, at least from the president's perspective, was to be such a terrible thing that it would force the Republicans to the table to bring revenues and then create this grand bargain. Now, you and I don't even support that end game, but tactically it seems to have been a failure in the sense that if it's something that people can mock so easily, then you're not really going to be doing a great job of forcing people to the table. But I think that at the same time, those of us that do care need to emphasize how urgent it really is, and I thought that Congressman Jackson Lee was doing a great job of that.
Indeed, she said that it's like a tsunami, that everything seems perfect, and all of a sudden the wave hits and washes out everything. And so we certainly know that, having that level of cuts within a 7-month period, there has to be some, beyond the cancellation of White House tours, there has to be some level of human pain and suffering that goes along with that. In fact, even on the Hill, we're seeing the ramifications that budgets have been cut while the salaries of congressmen have not been touched, ironically, even as they touch the salaries of civil servants across the country. Their own staff, their offices are experiencing cutbacks as well. So, the level of service from your congressman you can expect to change. Daniel, we also heard from Keith Ellison, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Let's listen to what he had to say.
It was always the cudgel, the stick that was supposed to beat the super committee into an agreement. But you know what? This thing from the very beginning was brought to us by people who believe that we need to shrink government to the size where you can drown it in a bathtub. These are always the anti-government types who don't accept that government of, by, and for the people, by the way, has any role in improving the lives of Americans. They ignore our interstate.
Daniel, it's interesting because it sounds like Keith Ellison was saying or implying that the sequester was brought to the people by the Republicans, while the Republicans voted for it in huge numbers. It was actually introduced by the Obama administration, from my understanding and reading of the accounts. And if that is the case, and it certainly is by the newspaper accounts, then what we're seeing is another failed strategy on the part of Democrats, correct?
Yeah, there's no question about it. I mean, obviously, if this is sort of the sort of fantasy of the anti-government crowd, of people that think the government serves no purpose and who want to drown in the bathtub, and I believe it is, and I think that that's why Republicans are so complacent, if not pleased, with the sequester, then why give it to them is the real question. And I think that was the strategic mistake on the part of the Obama administration, thinking that, well, if we negotiate with these people, we'll come away with a grand bargain that may solidify the president's legacy as kind of a great centrist deal maker. I think that is sort of seen as the political prize there. And a decision was made in the summer of 2011 to negotiate over the debt ceiling. And that set in motion this entire process, that the sequester would be a replacement for the super committee if it couldn't come up with $1.2 trillion in cuts.
Let's break down this concept of the grand bargain, because it's something that the Obama administration has wanted from the very beginning. I think that the Republicans had at least the big money on Wall Street has also been into this notion of a grand bargain, but the Republicans they seem to have been more wishy-washy about it. What is it, and is it in the best interest of the American people?
Sure. Well, the idea of a grand bargain is that in order to get our long-term debt down, in order to get our fiscal house in order, Democrats need to sacrifice their sacred cows, which are Social Security and Medicare, and Republicans perhaps need to sacrifice their sacred cow, which is increasing revenue and, in fact, increasing taxes. Obviously, another one of their sacred cows is defense spending, though for whatever reason that hasn't seemed, when a grand bargain is discussed, that is rarely included, I think, as one of the things that needs to be sacrificed. And this is something that I guess perhaps really came into play starting with the President's Fiscal Commission, co-chaired by Erskine Bowles and Alan Simpson. They put forward a $4 trillion deficit reduction package, some 2/3 or 3/4 spending cuts that was perceived to be a grand bargain. And the fact of the matter is, this has become a fixation in the media, in the Washington, D.C. media, and as you said, on Wall Street. I mean, this coalition, this groups like Fix the Debt that are now supported by dozens of CEOs on Wall Street and across corporate America. And I think the reason it's become a fixation is because, A, Wall Street is obsessed with inflation, and so anything that would actually take to stimulate the economy and tackle the difficult job and the hard challenges that we're actually facing, which is joblessness and inequality, would hurt their bottom line, or at least they would perceive it to hurt their bottom line. And second of all, that it's just much harder to make the real tough choices. And the real tough choices are taking on our pharmaceutical industry, introducing single-payer health care, reducing our defense spending. So what the media gets to do, and what I think figures in Washington get to do, is they can seem brave, and they can seem like they're taking a stand on integrity because they're standing down groups like ours, like Social Security Works and National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare, when in fact, as you and I know, we have comparably much fewer resources. The narrative is against us, and we're perceived to be sort of greedy geezers that are spoiling things for the rest of the country. So I think the American people need to know that this grand bargain is not grand at all. It is a grand betrayal, and it's betrayal for the trust of the American people who elected their leaders to protect these programs.
And it's a bipartisan betrayal.
Absolutely,
Right.
because it takes two to tango. I mean, as President Obama apparently said to Deputy House Whip Kevin McCarthy, you need me to cut entitlements. You need me to cut Social Security and Medicare, because if there's not a Democrat doing it too, the Republicans will get attacked for it.
Right. And there are many people who voted for Obama who had high hopes for a second term and thought that, he was only doing these kinds of negotiations in the first term because he had to play the game. But now that he's unfettered second term president, he's still pursuing these strategies, which suggests that this is his core ideology.
Yeah, it's a little bit confusing. Right. I mean, I guess you could make the argument that he has basically drank the Kool-Aid of the Beltway crowd and really does think that both sides need to come together, split the difference, otherwise we won't move forward. And, the fact of the matter is, for instance, this $4 trillion number, I mean, we've already done $2.5 trillion of deficit reduction. Why not just call it a day and move on to more urgent priorities like gun control and immigration reform?
Well, at the end of the day, go ahead, finish that thought.
Well, I mean, I guess one of my theories is that, like Bill Clinton had to stick it to poor people with welfare reform, and, obviously maybe there were some positive aspects of that. It seems like Democratic presidents think that it's good for their legacy to sort of whack vulnerable people.
Well, this is interesting because, to the extent that the Republicans are going to be Republicans, they have determined that they're going to dig their heels in. They're going to spend a full 8 years not governing, to the detriment of the American society, to their own constituents, to themselves in many ways, because their hatred and their distrust of this president is so great. Yet at the same time, ironically, it's actually saved the pillars of progress, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, from being cut drastically. So, Daniel, will you stay with us after the break?
Absolutely.
All right, you're listening to Pivot Point with Maya Rockeymoore, sponsored by the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. We'll be right back after the break.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
Social Security and Medicare. These programs touch the lives of virtually every American family. Yet with so much misinformation out there, Americans are pretty confused about their future. You deserve the truth. For more than 30 years, the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare has been leading the fight to preserve our nation's most successful programs. Join us and find out how to keep Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid strong for all generations. Learn more online at thetruthnow.org.
This is John Bauman. You know me best as Bowser, formerly of the group Sha Na Na. But these days, I'm rocking and rolling nationwide as part of the Truth Tour with the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. Some politicians claim they want to protect Medicare, but the truth is they support the Romney-Ryan Coupon Care Plan, which would end traditional Medicare. This could raise our health care costs as much as $500 more each month. Ending Medicare doesn't protect it. Learn the facts and join our national campaign at thetruthnow.org.
Welcome back to Pivot Point. I'm your host, Maya Rockeymoore. We're still with Daniel Marins, the Policy Director at Social Security Works and Executive Producer of Take Action News with David Schuster. Daniel, the chain CPI, it seems like this might not happen.
As you said, Maya, it seems like it might not happen only because of our friends on the extreme side of the Republican aisle. It's one of these ideas that seems like it just won't go away, unfortunately. I mean, this idea that seniors and people with disabilities can easily substitute for cheaper products as prices go up, when in fact most of their expenses are healthcare, housing, and energy, is completely ridiculous. And our policy elites, the folks in the media and the president's advisors that are out there pretending that this is a question of making the COLA more accurate, are really doing the public a disservice, because I think that people trust them.
So actually, let's break this down. People who receive Social Security benefits, other benefits through government, get an annual cost of living adjustment, also called a COLA. It helps their benefits keep pace with the cost of inflation, so to make sure that their Social Security check, when they go to the store, they can afford to buy bread, milk, eggs, they can afford to, meet their rent, etc. So it's adjusted based on a formula, yet the chain CPI seeks to reduce that formula so that benefits are cut over the long term. How much is that benefit cut?
Well, let's say someone claimed that Social Security benefit at age 65 and they were an average earner. Then at age 75, it would be an annual cut of over $600. Mm-hmm. At age 85, it would be annual cut of $1,147. And at age 95, it would be a cut of over $1,600.
Now, you have some, primarily those in the Obama administration, who are going around saying, it's okay, we can establish this cut and we can protect the vulnerable populations, we can protect the poor, we can protect veterans. But this seems to be, against the very reason why they're saying they're making the cut in the first place, which I thought was to make it more accurate. What's going on here?
Right. I mean, why do you have to protect the vulnerable if it's just a technical fix to make it more accurate? I mean, I think that what we're seeing is an attempt to put a Band-Aid on a broken arm. I mean, it's ridiculous. The National Women's Law Center has looked at, for instance, what a benefit bump up in 20 years after eligibility would look like if they were to increase benefits, let's say when someone is 85 or phase in from 80 to 85, a 5% benefit increase. And they find that cumulatively it barely even restores the cuts. And that's even for a single elderly woman and who are more likely to be living in poverty. So for folks with larger benefits, it certainly doesn't restore those cuts, and even then you have to live long enough to receive it, as just one example. I mean, this is an attempt to soothe liberal consciences, and it's bogus, and it's a lie. And, you know, it almost reminds me, again, I mean, I think of NAFTA, of the North American Free Trade Agreement. I think of welfare reform. I think of when Simpson Bowles said that they would create a hardship exemption for their increase in the retirement age. There's always some mythical, abstract plan to make, let's say, oh, we're passing a trade agreement. We'll give those laid-off factory workers job retraining. 10 years later, 20 years later, the damage still hasn't really been repaired. And that's because these policy elites that are making those arguments, unfortunately, they'll be safe and sound no matter what, and they can walk away from it. But for those of us that work with these communities, it is all too real.
So it's an assault on the middle class for a group of people, an administration, a party that claims to be for the middle class. The chain CPI actually represents an assault on the middle class.
Right, yeah, I mean, one of the funny things that my friend Matt Stoller, who's a senior advisor to Congressman Alan Grayson, has pointed out is, well, if you're going to protect the poor from the chain CPI, does that mean today's poor or the number of people that will become poor due to the chain CPI?
Yeah.
You'd have a whole other problem there.
What is the superlative CPI?
That is really just their apparently it has some actual history of being called that among in relatively nonpartisan circles. That is their term for the chain CPI. That is, so it's, but I think it's a euphemism.
Mm-hmm. A euphemism for, cuts to the middle class. Superlative because it establishes cuts. It makes you think it's a great thing, like the grand bargain, which sounds like a great thing, but it really isn't. And then you get duped into getting benefit cuts for today's seniors, today's disabled, today's veterans.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they're geniuses at marketing. There's no question about that. Yeah. But if I want to sound an optimistic note, I'll say that. Let's
sound one. Let's get one. Find one for me. Thank you.
Well, you and I, we've been working in this field. Or rather, you much longer than I. But 2.5 years ago, when the Bowles-Simpson Commission was meeting, it wasn't just the chain CPI. It was the retirement age. It was the benefit formula. It was global spending caps for Medicare. It was all kinds of things. It was ending even perhaps the tax break for employer-provided health insurance.
Right.
It was a broad attack on the middle class that was seen as almost a fait accompli, that this was going to go through, and how could the president not embrace it? And because of our drumbeat, because of the drumbeat of activist groups like the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare, like Social Security Works, and like those 300,000 activists that signed the Cancel, Sequester, No Cuts petition, they haven't done it. They haven't cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid at all. And I think that if we stay strong, they won't get away with it now.
All right. So switching gears a little bit, I'd love for you to talk about MSNBC. What has been your ongoing battle with MSNBC, particularly with regards to Ed Rendell, the former governor of Pennsylvania?
It is just a question of fairness and transparency. That is all it is. If Ed Rendell or any former elected official wants to get on television and say it's very important that the president cut Social Security and Medicare for the sake of the future of our country.
Which he has been saying.
Which he has absolutely been saying.
Okay.
And it, of course, lends it a tremendous degree of credibility because not only is he a Democrat, he's also perceived to kind of have this, common touch that, he looked out for, he had a decent, perhaps a decent relationship with organized labor in his state, not uniformly great, but he certainly makes himself out as someone who's in touch with the common man, and that really is, I think, disingenuous only because he doesn't tell you that he serves as a co-chair of the Fix the Debt campaign.
And the Fix the Debt campaign is?
The Fix the Debt campaign is a campaign financed by Pete Peterson and a number of other Wall Street CEOs like Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan Chase, David Cote of Honeywell, Jeff Immelt of GE, people that have spent their lives ransacking workers' pensions and cutting their pay and laying them off and or gambling on their livelihoods in the case of Wall Street, that are now telling us that we need to make hard choices, and by we, they mean us. And they're talking about Social Security and Medicare cuts.
So I'm Jane Public. I'm sitting out, in the middle of the country in Oklahoma City. I'm flipping on and I'm watching MSNBC. And lo and behold, there is Ed Rendell on TV acting as a pundit, talking about we need to be serious adults in the room. We need to cut Social Security and Medicare. We need to drive for a grand bargain. And all the while, I have no knowledge that this man is actually being paid, he's being supported, he's being a tool of an agenda, a larger moneyed agenda to actually undermine these programs. And what is MSNBC's responsibility for ensuring transparency in this kind of information age?
Well, I think there's no question that if he was represented, let's say on his lower third on the title that shows up on the screen, and it said co-chair Fix the Debt campaign, or when he talks about infrastructure projects, partner at Ballard Spahr Law Firm, a law firm that is negotiating public-private partnerships on infrastructure projects, that then at least the American public knows that he has an interest in presenting the positions that he has. They can then judge on their own whether it's a valid policy position, but when you have him there as just former governor of Pennsylvania, Ed Rendell, without informing the public of these conflicts of interest, without informing them that he is the co-chair of the Fix the Debt campaign, I was not able to ascertain whether he's paid in that capacity. I assume that Michael Bloomberg, the other co-chair, is not paid, so I don't know. But obviously it's an affiliation that needs to be disclosed. Mm-hmm. And, I said in that piece, and in my letter to Phil Griffin, which I have still have not received a response.
So you have written to MSNBC's president and you have not received a response?
I wrote the president, and I copied on the email the president of Comcast, NBC Universal. Mm-hmm. So the president of the entire NBC Universal that is owned by Comcast, and I did not receive a response. I mean, the thing is, it's just I'm a small fish, but when I talk on Take Actions with David Schuster about Social Security and Medicare, I always say, look, I wear two hats. This is something else that I do. You can that I work for Social Security Works. You can interpret my views on Social Security through that lens. Obviously, I would argue that being an advocate for these beneficiaries enriches me a lot less than if I went to, let's say, work for the Fix the Debt campaign. And so my motives, I think, are less suspect. But at the end of the day, that's something I still want viewers and listeners to know.
Right.
And I think that's just a matter of transparency and fairness. And one of the things that I pointed out is that in the past, MSNBC has been huge sticklers on this, mm-hmm. because they suspended Joe Scarborough and Keith Olbermann for giving campaign donations to people that they had on the show.
Well, that suggests that there might be a corporate interest in MSNBC. I know that at one time they were owned by GE. Do you happen to know who owns them now?
Yes, they're owned by Comcast now.
Okay.
So they certainly have a corporate interest in something. How that all lines up, I mean, is another story.
All right. Well, Daniel Marans, I thank you for coming on the show again. You're always a terrific guest, and I hope I can have you on again in the future.
Anytime. I love Pivot Point with Maya Rockeymoore, and you're someone that I certainly look up to in terms of your leadership and advocacy for social insurance, for communities in need, and actually also as someone who successfully translated that into media success.
Well, thanks, Daniel. With that, you are listening to Pivot Point with Maya Rockeymoore, sponsored by the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. We'll be right back to talk about this American anachronism we call CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, next after the break.
This is John Bauman. You know me best best as Bowser, formerly of the group Sha Na Na. And you know, when we were rocking and rolling all those years ago, I wasn't particularly worrying about my retirement or how I'd pay for health care. But now that I'm 65, I really understand the importance of Medicare, not just for myself, but for generations of working Americans who need secure health care as they get older. That's why this election is so important. The Romney-Ryan Coupon Care Plan will mean the end of traditional Medicare. It gives seniors a partial payment which loses value over time and raises our health care costs as much as $500 more each month. Coupon Care also puts us at the mercy of private insurers, making it harder to pick our own doctors. All of this to pay for tax cuts for the wealthy? Are you kidding me? Americans of all ages say no to Coupon Care. Bum 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 dang a dang dang ding a dong ding. Preserve Medicare.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
Welcome back to Pivot Point. I'm your host, Maya Rockeymoore. I am pleased to introduce to you two very special reporters, Robert Brune, who covered the Conservative Political Action Conference this week, and also Ari Rabenhoft, who is the host of his own show and was at CPAC this week. Ari, I was on your show this week, and you were worried about what you were going to say. What actually happened?
We went down there to CPAC. I was invited on this panel to speak, and I decided to speak truth and tell. The panel I was on was they screened the movie Hating Breitbart, which Andrew Marcus, the director of the film, invited me down. And frankly, I will say that Andrew was incredibly gracious, and the moderator of the panel, Rusty Humphreys, who's a conservative radio host, were both incredibly fair, and I was extremely well treated by both the panel organizers and the panel thing. I want to say that because they do deserve credit for, being unfailingly polite and really, making sure a situation that could have been, that a real conversation was able to happen. And I decided to tell the conservative audience that conservative media is what's hurting them. Mm-hmm. And the legacy of Andrew Breitbart is what's hurting them. And the idea that they only talk to themselves is what's hurting them. And I don't think they took the advice. Joel Pollack, the editor-in-chief of Breitbart.com, stood up and accused Media Matters of slandering him and asked for a correction. Basically because the discrepancy was, earlier in the week we put up a pre-CPAC post of all the people at CPAC and some of the things you might have done, and Joel had posted a post on Breitbart.com, and in the post he said, "We don't believe in birtherism, we're not a birther site, but here's a document from Barack Obama's book publisher from 20 years ago saying he's from Kenya." Mm-hmm. And we put him in the birther section because, as I said to that audience, furthering the birther conspiracy to me is just as bad as being a birther. Mm-hmm. So you can say, I'm not a birther. It's kind of like saying, I'm not a racist, and it's not exactly the same. But furthering a conspiracy, when you have to say, I'm not, but, it's never a good thing. Mm-hmm. And so when Joel asked for an apology, I said no apology would be given. And that was one exchange. Lash also stood up and asked for an apology. I frankly didn't know what post she was referring to, but I said I would look into it, but I doubt an apology's coming.
All right, you went into the lion's den, it sounds like.
I decided to go into the lion's den. And look, I think progressives should go in, and when we go in, we should speak truth to them. We shouldn't be scared of our ideas, because we're right.
Robert, Ari just mentioned racism. We've also seen sexism. I mean, it was like, I call it American anachronism, that we have these blasts from America's dark past coming to light at CPAC conference. The session on, how you can actually be a pro black, I guess, Republican, calling yourself a Frederick Douglass Republican. The session that talked about pro-life versus pro-choice and where they came out on that, there just seemed to be a whole lot of backward kinds of, activities happening at this conference. Can you tell me what you saw? Robert, are you there? Robert, are you there?
Yeah. Getting back to the conference where Ari spoke, I had trouble with John Funn of the National Review's definition of racism or racist speech. His definition, I could be corrected, Ari might be able to help me out with this, was feeling superior over people, and that left and liberals need to stop saying when people say mean things about a race that's racist, and it was just completely absurd to me.
Can I just add one thing to that?
Mm-hmm.
Which is, I don't remember the exact Funn quote, so I can't. It was something like that. I don't remember what it was, so I don't. It was a long panel, and I don't remember what was said. But there was one other comment said that really stuck with me, and it was my jerk store moment, referencing the Seinfeld moment where you walk out and you're like, damn, I wish I had said this.
Mm-hmm.
Was Andrew Marcus and a few other people on the panel said the worst thing you can do is call someone a racist. And I had in the back of my mind, and I really wanted to say it, and for some reason I just never got the chance to. No, the worst thing you can do is be a bigot.
Exactly.
And therein lies the problem. I think is to me the worst thing. Like, to me, bigotry, not just racism, but racism, sexism, homophobia, are the worst thing. They do so much damage to our society. Those are the worst things you can be. And their message was the worst things you can do is call someone that.
Well, it was interesting, right? Because there was this session on race, and you had this gentleman from the audience stand up and talk about, that the slaves, people who were held as slaves, should have been thanking their slave owners.
Well, interestingly, I saw the video of that, and what seemed to happen was there were one of the players in the video, I believe, was who stood up, not on the panel, but who was just in the audience, was a white nationalist from Towson, who basically first proclaimed somehow that whites were being disenfranchised.
Yeah.
Which I don't think he understands what disenfranchised is. So we'll start there. But first proclaimed that whites were being disenfranchised, and then when one of the members of the panel, who was a conservative, said to him, Frederick Douglass wrote a letter to his slave owner 20 years after he was free, basically saying, I forgive you for enslaving me. The response from that white nationalist was, forgive him for what? Giving him, food and shelter and
right.
What? I mean, how do we put it? The CPAC did a good job this year keeping the crazy off the stage. I will say that they've had problems in the past years, kind of cleansing the crazy from the stage in the exhibit hall. This year they did a great job of that, but like Orly Tate, the birther queen, was running around with a VIP pass.
Yeah.
You had these white nationalists at events standing up, proclaiming these things. This is, you had Think Progress had a great video. I spoke to a number of people about Rob Portman on gay marriage, and there were mixed reviews. But Think Progress has a video up that shows their reactions when they asked about Rob Portman's support of gay marriage, and some of them are frankly, conservatives like to say, we don't hate gay people, we just don't want them to get married.
Robert, were you there? I hear you. There was a lot of backward talking and backward thinking. Were you there when Ben Carson gave his much touted speech?
No, I wasn't there.
Okay. Well, it seems like Ben Carson is now a rising star, walking into this anachronism, if you will, and as an African American, and suggesting that he may be interested in a higher office. So I think that's been a fabulous and fascinating outcome from the CPAC conference. Thank you, Ari. Thank you, Robert, for joining me. We actually have to go. and thank my listening audience for yet another segment of Pivot Point with Maya Rockeymoore. I'd like to thank my producing cast of certainly Courtney, certainly Peter James Callahan, and Rich Webster. And please join us every Sunday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time on weactradio.com, 1480 AM in Washington, D.C. Until next time, America.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.